Continuing with my experiences within the British penal system over 27 and a half years, 8.5 years of that spent in solitary confinement. I was at Blunderston in, I think it was 1985 to 1986, just prior to the new year coming in 96. I was moved out of Blunderston under the suspicion of selling cannabis for phone cards and tobacco and canteen goods. I was moved from there to Winston Green Prison. Winston Green Prison at the time was notorious for assaults and violence towards inmates from prison staff. One incident that comes to mind, which was in all the newspapers at the time and covered nationally by all the tabloids, was one inmate. He was on remand, he was unconvicted on remand, and he was accused of having an argument with his wife and kicking the front door, causing 11 quid's worth of damage. The magistrates placed him on remand for the incident. While he was on remand, he was beaten to death in Winston Green Prison. The coroner found something like 100 and odd bruises on his body. The prison staff denied all knowledge of it and said that's how they found him. He was in a segregation unit. Well, the idea of being in a segregation unit is that you're secluded from any other prisoners. So it can only be members of staff, or he beat himself up. Anyway, the man died. And to this day, I believe his wife still protests outside Winston Green Prison because of his death. The man died for 11 pounds worth of damage. Anyway, I digress. I was sent, when I arrived, I was sent from Blunderston segregation unit to Winston Green segregation unit. On arriving at Winston Green, the van drove straight around to the segregation unit, passing reception. And when I got off the bus, when I was taken off the bus, there was about 6 or 7 prison officers, all getting really close to me. So I would feel intimidated by it, or a sense of helplessness. I was escorted into the segregation unit. Now, what you've got to understand, in them days, you had what was called the POA, which was the Prison Officers Association. It was a union, and they was one of the powerfulest unions in the country. It was Margaret Thatcher who broke that union, thank God. And what happened, what used to happen is, if you assaulted a prison officer in one prison, that wouldn't be the end of it. They would contact their mates, other prison officers in other prisons, and give them a rundown and say, this is what the inmates like, blah, blah, blah. And some of them would want reprisals for it. So when I was taken in there, if you remember in my last video, I mentioned that I threw a bucket of excrement over a prison officer. Well, what they'd done when I got to Winston Green was, someone previously had been on a dirty protest, like covered the walls in excrement, the cell walls in excrement. They put me in that cell without it being cleaned out or anything. Normally they clean the cells out after a dirty protest and they leave it to air out for a couple of weeks and then use the cell again. They put me in the cell and it was literally rancid, it stunk. There was still lumps of excrements on the walls. I was left in there for 4 days. No exercise, no nothing. I was given my food in the cell. I had to sleep in the cell. I had to live in that cell for 24 hours a day for 4 days. So you can imagine I'm pissed off. And after 4 days, they took me out of the cell, allowed me to have a shower and a change of clothes, and then they moved me upstairs. Now, I was moved out of Blunderston on 24th of December, the day before Christmas. So I spent all Christmas Day in a cell full of excrement. By the time they moved me upstairs, I was raging. I just hated them because them times it's hard to express, but there was a lot of hatred between prison officers and inmates. And in the Midlands and up north, they hated Londoners. They used to call us flash bastards and other derogatory terms. They moved me upstairs to the third landing, which was still in the segregation unit, but it was a very large segregation unit with 3 floors. So they allowed me to get the shower, change my clothes and move me up to a cleaner cell. The cell was still manky, but it was cleaner. And what comes to mind is, on New Year's Day, there was loads of banging and everything, and I was thinking, well, it's New Year, because on New Year, they start banging on the doors, just like other people set off fireworks in the community, they bang on doors in prison. So what happened was, they was banging, but it was the chant that went with the banging. I think it's The Wizard of Oz, where they sing that song, "Hey-ho, the witch is dead, the wicked witch is dead." But what they was doing, it was to that tune, but they was singing, "Hey-ho, the monster's dead, the wicked monster's dead." And I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? Because it was just weird. Well, the next day, they didn't let anybody out on exercise. So the following day, which was the 2nd of January, they let us out of the exercise yard because I was obviously on punishment, not on punishment, but in the segregation unit. I was exercised on my own, but there was 2 prison officers like guarding the exercise, and I heard a conversation between them. Apparently, what had happened on the 1st. Fred West, obviously everybody knows him. He was a mass murderer. And he topped himself on the 1st of January. And that's why all the doors were locked and nobody was allowed out for exercise and whatever. I heard the only reason why I know, because I heard the 2 prison officers talking about it. So anyway, during the exercise, I said to him, because I was curious, I said to one of them, what had happened? And he was like, "Carry on exercises, don't fucking talk to me," because they still had a lot of animosity towards me for the prison officer I'd thrown excrement over previously. So anyway, they took me back to my cell after my hour's exercise and put me in my cell. Well, about 4 or 5 days after that, it was a really somber mood. What had happened was, there was a senior officer and he'd been having a lot of domestic problems. And at home, he'd had a shotgun. And all the prison officers was in mourning because of it. Because he was apparently a really loved officer by them. By loved by them, I mean he was a bastard to us, to the inmates. He used to run the segregation unit. And anyway, he had topped himself. Well, this officer used to always do running. He used to love going for like marathons and things like that. Now, people might think this is a really wicked thing for me to do, but to me it was funny at the time. And that doesn't paint me in a good light, but there you go. That's how much animosity there was between inmates and staff. I rung my cell bell when I found this out, and I said to them, "Can I see the security governor?" And they went, "Well, why do you want to see the security governor?" I said, "I can't tell you that, but it's very urgent. I see the security governor. I've got some information for him. And I believe this information is urgent. And if you don't call him and this happens, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble." So they must have thought about it for an hour or two. Anyway, the security governor comes up after about 2-3 hours. And he says, Davis, he's got about 4 prison officers in front of him. Like, he's not going to come in on his own. He's got they've opened the cell, there's about 4 prison officers in front of him, and he's standing behind them, saying, like, "What do you want?" And I said, "Well, look, I've got some important information for you." And he went, "What's that?" I said, "Well, I don't want to say in front of the officers because it may concern them." He went, "Okay, Davis," he said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll get you a bit of paper and a pen, and you can write it down. And give me a piece of paper, a pen, an A4 scrap of paper, a pen, and an envelope." He said, "What you do, you seal the envelope, and my staff will give it to me, unopened." I said, "Well, yeah, that's fair." So anyway, they give me the piece of paper, they give me the pen, and leave me to write the note. So I wrote out the note and gave it to the staff. Now, in a way, this was stupid of me because I got a real proper beating for it. I mean, they wanted to smash me to pieces. I had black eyes and bruises everywhere. I've given the envelope with the security information in it. About half an hour later, I can hear them banging up all the cleaners, locking up all the cleaners, because they're normally out doing cleaning. I can hear them locking up all the cleaners, and a prison officer shouting, "Lock up, lock up." They've locked the whole place up, and it's gone deadly silent. He's read the note. Next thing you know, the door's flung open. They've got the plastic shields, they're dressed in mufti, and they just started beating the shit out of me. And then dragged me back downstairs to that same cell, but it had been cleaned by now, to that same cell that had all the excrement on the walls, but it had been cleaned. So after they beat me, they took me down, they put me in there. About 20 minutes later, they've come in, roughed me up again, put me in a body belt it's like a level weightlifting belt with cuffs at each side, so you're like that. And the governor's come in and he went, "I don't think that was very, very, very funny. It was a very traumatic thing for my staff, blah, blah, what I'd done." I wrote on the note, "Dear sir, sorry to hear about your prison officer, but his wife must be stuck for money, what with funeral arrangements and so forth. I would like to buy all the pairs of trainers he no longer uses, because I can put some use to them and it'd give his wife some money towards whatever funeral arrangements she may need to make." That is the level of hatred there was between inmates and staff. A tragic incident I took advantage of. Now I feel liberty, but at the time I hated them so much for what they was putting me through that I would do anything to cause them pain, to cause them hurt. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. What you've got to realise, that they had been moving me each month they'd been moving me. Like I'd be in one prison for 2 days, one prison for 6 days, one prison for 20 days, one prison for 30 days. And this was going on like year in, year out for about 2.5 years. So I'd lost all contact with my family. My family would write me letters. I wouldn't see that letter for like 8-9 months, because the letter would go to one prison, but I'd already been moved to another prison. They'd send it to that prison, then that prison would send it to that prison, till eventually it caught up to me about 14 months later. And this was a continuing thing. My family would book a visit to come and see me. By the time they'd come to see me, I'd been moved to another prison. But they don't tell my family that I've been moved. They let them travel all the way up north on a 4-hour journey to see me, only to say, oh, he's not here, he's been moved somewhere else. So the level of spite was enormous. And the level of pain it caused my family was enormous. That's why they called it the ghost train, the 10F74 laydown. That's why they called it the ghost train. Because you would literally become a ghost to your family. They know you're in there, but they don't know where you are, how to contact you. It's the same as like I would write a letter to my family, and then they would move me to somewhere else. But that letter would go to the censors in the prison, because they censor your mail before they send it out. And that censor would send it back to the landing, because my file had already left the prison with me to go to the following prison. And it was a continuous thing. And the level of hatred it built inside me from, and the animosity towards them, was kind of like on a scale you wouldn't believe. But partly it was, I'm not saying my actions was justified, but my feelings were justified. And I would do anything to cause them pain, to hurt them, but I would never actually assault them. The reason why I would throw excrement over them, because it was embarrassing, it would cause them shame, but they couldn't charge me for assault. Well, they could charge me for assault in the prison, which wouldn't give me any more time on top of my sentence. But if I physically injured them, they could then take me to outside court and give me a fresh sentence. So I made sure not to do that, to find a way to cause them pain and embarrassment without actually getting more time on top. So it was calculated, and it was the only way I could see of inflicting the hurt on them that they'd inflicted on me. I mean, the beating I got because of that letter was unbelievable. In the space of about a week and a half before they shipped me back to somewhere else, they'd most probably beat me up about 4 or 5 times. And I'm not going to sit here and play gangster and go, well, it didn't matter. Like, I can take it. That's all bullshit. That's for the fairy tales. It fucking hurt. At one point, I literally thought they would kill me. I'd literally had to drag myself under a metal bed to stop the blows, or to minimise the blows. And they would walk off laughing. That hurt more than the beating. Winston Green is notorious, it always was notorious, for being one of the most violent prisons towards inmates in the whole country. And it's not like it is now, where you've got lovely cells and things like that, and you've got toilets and showers in the cells and phones in the cells. You had nothing. It was an old Victorian building with paint peeling off the walls. It was disgusting. And they was brutal towards inmates, not just me. I mean, young kids who had done stupid little things, that didn't warrant it. They didn't deserve that kind of, to be inflicted with that in their life. You know, me, I got to the point where I just didn't care anymore. And me writing that letter, I knew I was going to get a beating for it. But at the time, I just did not care. You know, it was like me saying, do your worst. Because the emotional and mental pain they caused on me and my family was unbelievable. And my anger towards them was not really what they did to me. My anger towards them was what they was doing to my family. Because let's face it, it was me who was being punished, not my family. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. If you do listen, please subscribe, and if possible, give me a like. It costs nothing to subscribe. Thank you so much.